Okay, so today what I want to talk about is the Schmidt-Rubin series, if you allow me to say, the Schmidt-Rubin series of rifles. And I kind of want to talk about some of the variations between the rifles, specifically with the bolts and the magazines. I think that's the really fascinating thing to me with these guns. Yeah, there's other differences going from series to series. Most notably, probably the sights and the barrel length, right? So they improved the sights from this crazy roller coaster sight setup to much better sights, and then they shortened the barrel on the K series. So kind of the funny thing about the 1889 is that it wasn't actually adopted until 1890 by the Swiss. So I'm not exactly sure why it's called 1889 if it was adopted in 1890. Because the 1896 was adopted in 1896, and it's called 1896, so I don't quite get their the Swiss nomenclature. It seems to make about as much sense as German firearm nomenclature. So the 1889 wasn't the official service rifle of the Swiss for very long, because in 1896 the Swiss adopted an updated version of the 1889. And it's sometimes called just the 1896 or the 1889/1896 or 89/96, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it the 1896. So they adopted the 1896 and 1896 because it incorporated a lot of improvements to the bolts. Now, overall, the rifles looked almost identical. The only difference was with the bolts and with the receiver length. So the thing is, pretty much, as soon as this gun was adopted, they knew that this receiver length is crazy. Like, just the fact, like, I can put my whole hand in between, like, the trigger guard and the magazine, which is just nuts that this exists. And the Swiss knew it, and they pretty much immediately wanted to start working on it. Of course, they talked to Rudolph, and Rudolph's like, no, I'm not going to fix it for whatever reason. I don't quite understand why Schmidt decided he didn't want to fix it. I have a theory. So Schmidt died in 1898. He was only like 66. So he died in 1898, 2 years after the adoption of the 1896. So to me that kind of seems like, he's getting really close to the end of his life. He's not super old, like he's only in his, early 60s. But I have a feeling like it maybe had something to do with his like health problems or something like that. Maybe he just didn't want to work. Maybe he's just retired, sick, didn't want to work on it anymore. So I think that might have been why. So what ended up happening is that a Colonel, oh boy, I wrote this down. A Colonel Boggles, okay, I don't speak German, or the Swiss dialect of German. So that guy, he worked on this 1889 bolt. So I'll show you the before and after here. So this is the bolt off of the 1889, and this thing is just crazy massive. Like this whole sort of bolt extension thing, I don't quite understand. I mean, I guess he didn't think that he could put the bolt sleeve over this part. So he made it like this. He put the locking lugs way back here to the rear. Now, I measured this, and it's about 155 millimeters from the bolt face to the front of the locking lug. So it's just a crazy amount of room. Now, let me show you. This is a K98K bolt. So in comparison, I mean, the lugs are so far back on the 1889 that it's almost the whole length of a K98K bolt. I mean, this is just a crazy bolt. So Colonel Boggles, he was able to shorten the bolt by about an inch, which is, it's really good because obviously shortening the bolt an inch saves that space. It saves the space in the receiver, so the receiver can be an inch shorter. And it also makes it lighter, makes all, not having to make it out of all that steel makes the gun overall lighter. Most importantly, he moved the bolt, or he moved the lugs on the bolt sleeve all the way to the front of the bolt sleeve, which after you see it, it just looks pretty obvious. Like why why Rudolf Schmidt just didn't design it that way in the first place is it's kind of beyond me. I'm not sure. I guess when this was designed, black powder was still being used, and I think the sort of thought process was by being way back here, it's never going to get gummed up or anything. But I mean, still, even on this guy, it's still really far back. And probably the most notable feature of the Schmidt-Rubin, other than the straight bolt, is probably this relatively gigantic box magazine that's on this thing. It's a 12-round magazine. It's not exactly the easiest to remove. These, of course, weren't meant to be removed. They were supposed to be topped up with Rubin's charger that he designed for this thing. But this is a 12-round magazine, right? 2 more than the Lee Enfield. So the reason why the Swiss wanted the 1889 to have a 12-round magazine is because of this guy. This gun has a 12-round capacity with its long tube magazine. So with their new rifle, the Swiss didn't want to give up any of that capacity. They still really, really liked the idea of having 12 rounds. Now with the Vetterli, it's still single-loaded 1 at a time, so it's not so much about the speed, it's about having that backup magazine in reserve. Which that same idea came over on the 1889. So the magazine has 2 settings here on the side. If it's flipped all the way up, that's the magazine cutoff. So it pushes the magazine down to where it's too far down for the bolt to pick up a round when you cycle the action. Now, when this thing is in the down position, this is with the magazine on. And that's just one of those really interesting holdovers back from that idea. Now, later on, the Swiss, once that magazine cutoff goes out of style, the Swiss, they come up with this little piece of sheet metal which goes over the little magazine, which prevents you from accidentally bumping it up and cutting the magazine off. And the magazine itself, it's only held into the rifle by the trigger guard. This actually doesn't engage anywhere on the receiver. This is just connected to the trigger guard, and then the trigger guard is connected to the receiver, which strength-wise is okay, but it's not exactly the strongest. Now the magazine choice for this rifle was pretty smart. This is the Lis Magazine, so they pretty much in the late 1880s when the gun's being designed, you pretty much only have like 3 sort of magazine designs. You have the tube magazine, like with their Vetterli. You have the Lis Magazine, which is pretty cool, and then you have the Mannlicher magazine. So those are the 3 choices. I think smartly he went with the Lis Magazine. Sort of the problem with the Lis Magazine is that you need a really good way to load it. And so this is something that Rubin actually came up with, was these little charger packets. I don't think Rubin came up with this exact idea because stuff kind of like it existed a little bit before. But he sort of perfected it to work with the Schmidt rifle and with the Lis Magazine. So for its time, it's not fantastic, but it's kind of okay. Like this is probably isn't as good as the Mannlicher clip around the same time. However, if you want something to work with the Lis Magazine, it was pretty much you had to have something like this. So that's what he came up with. So now we're in the early 1900s. The Swiss are looking at other European countries, the types of guns that they're fielding, and they're really looking at their own gun and really seeing that it needs to be updated. Particularly, they wanted to update their ammunition. So the Swiss started out with a round nose, fairly mild shooting cartridge that was also paper patched. And they did sort of upgrade it a little bit at a time with slightly better performance and with a full metal jacket on the cartridge. However, compared with other countries, they definitely wanted to get an upgrade. So they were looking at their new 1896 action, and they realized with the lugs moved forward, that action is actually stronger than the previous 1889 actions. So they could go ahead and develop a new cartridge that was slightly more powerful than their GP90 and have a Spitzer point. So this is the new ammunition they came up with. It's the GP11. Most importantly, it's now a Spitzer bullet, so it's nice and pointed. It has a really nice ballistic coefficient. They also upped the pressure of this round to 45,000 psi. The old one was 38,000, I believe. So it's a pretty significant increase in the amount of pressure that with this new cartridge. Also is a flatter shooting cartridge. So the Swiss, they got their new ammo that they wanted. With the new ammunition comes new sights. So this new ammo is it's a much flatter shooting cartridge. So they designed these new sights that don't have the crazy roller coaster on it. They don't need that anymore. And but mostly overall, the rifle is still very similar, with one other exception: the magazine. They downgraded their rifles to this 6-round magazine. So they picked 6, obviously, because to load 12, you needed 2 6-round charger clips. So keeping it at 6 meant that they could keep using the same clips that were already in their supply system. And that's really the two big changes with the 1911 upgrade from the 1889 and 1896. So putting these together, I mean, the length is pretty similar. Like I said, with the 1896, they did shorten it by about 1 inch, but the barrel length is the same. The front sight's the same. You can use the same front sight protectors on either one of these guns. They're interchangeable. Now the Swiss knew that their previous guns, the 1896s, were strong enough for the new GP90 ammo. So instead of just creating new guns and phasing them out, they created a program to update it to the 1911 specs. So they took all their 1896s. If they didn't replace the stock, you can kind of tell by if it has a pistol grip on it, and if you see a line on the stock, as if the pistol grip was added on there. That's one telltale sign that you're looking at a 96 to 1911 conversion. But on the purpose-made 1911s, they just came with this pistol grip now, which is a really good feature. I really like the semi-pistol grips on my rifles. They also made a carbine version of the 1911, the K11. And they could mostly do that just because the receiver was shortened up that extra inch. So still not quite the performance they want out of their carbine, but it's still probably the best carbine that the Swiss have had up to that point. And definitely up to that point, it was the most numerous. And just like with 1889, this new magazine, it's not held in anywhere on the receiver. It's only held in by a pretty small margin. So fast forward now to like the 1920s. The Swiss are looking at other European nations, and they're noticing this trend of everyone adopting a universal short rifle. Just this rifle that's just one length that just is going to be issued to all branches regardless of what their job is. So they're looking for this intermediate length rifle. They look at their K11, and it kind of fits it, but they're not quite happy with the K11 because of that still excessive receiver length that's held over from the original Schmidt design. And they don't like really the barrel length that they're getting with it. They're not quite happy with everyone sort of getting lowered down to the K11 accuracy standards. So they basically wanted a rifle that could be as accurate as their 1911 rifle, as the G11, but in the K11 size. And the person who's credited with actually doing that is a Major Führer. Sorry, I don't speak German. So he's credited with shortening it. He was able to actually take quite a bit of length off of the bolt. And this is what he was able to come up with. This is a greatly simplified Schmidt bolt. This is where a lot of the Schmidt-Rubin purists will say that this gun really departs from the original design, that the K31 cannot really be called a Schmidt-Rubin. I think it's pretty close, especially when you disassemble the two, that this is really just kind of a slightly modernized and upgraded Schmidt. So it's a Schmidt derivative or something like that, but it's not a straight Schmidt. So this is what he actually simplified it. So this is pretty nuts. He was able to take out like 2 inches out of this, a little over 2 inches, I think, out of this whole bolt. He just basically got rid of this whole extension. And the interesting thing is the bolt lugs are about on the same exact spot on both of the rifles because they're both at the very front of the bolt collars. It's just by getting rid of this bolt extension, he's just able to shorten it. So the Swiss really loved this, and so they of course they adopted it. Now they did a few changes going to this new rifle, which is called the K31. So they made a few changes here to the K31 magazine, comparing it to a 1911 magazine. You can see they kind of made it less rectangular. It's a little bit smaller, so it saves a little bit of space. And they also improved the way this locks into the rifle. So no longer does the magazine only lock into the trigger guard. This actually has a little tab on the side that goes up and hooks into the receiver. So that makes this magazine a much more like steady hold on the rifle. And because it's not held in by the trigger guard, you don't have to worry about any sort of play with the trigger guard and stock and it not feeding correctly. This locks into the receiver. It's going to feed perfect every time. So now because of the bolt being shortened up, of course they're able to shorten up the whole receiver. They were able to shorten up the receiver by about, I think it's about 2.5 inches, able to move the magazine back into really where it should have been. And also the sight is moved back considerably on this rifle. So even though the barrel is pretty significantly shorter than the 1911, you still get a really long sight radius on that gun. So it still maintains a high level of accuracy. And the K31 is still the same overall length as the K11, but with the shorter receiver, that means that they were able to squeeze in an extra 2.5 inches of barrel length. So with this new rifle, you have a strong action, you have a nice, reliable magazine. You have a rifle that its barrel length is actually good enough to give it the kind of accuracy that the Swiss wanted, and the Swiss were very happy with this new system. Now again, kind of like I said, you can't really call this gun a Schmidt-Rubin, but I still sometimes refer to it as being in the Schmidt-Rubin family because it's not directly Schmidt because of course he didn't design it, he was dead. But it's got very, very strong influences from that gun. These are just really cool rifles. It is one of my favorite rifles of all time. It's just a very slick, smooth rifle. And I mean, the reason why Aaron sold his was because it was like so good it was boring. So to me, that's perfect. I really like this gun. They made the most K31s out of all the series of rifles. So the K31s, they are the most abundant, but they are also the most sought after. So usually these guns are a little bit more expensive than K11s and 1911s. So if you want a Schmidt-Rubin and maybe you don't have the money quite for a K31, I would look at getting a K11 or a 1911. Still, even after the adoption of this gun, it's kind of argued on is the 1911 or the K31 the more accurate rifle. So you're not losing anything accuracy-wise getting the 1911 or the G11. Thank you to the patrons that support Milsurp World. We really appreciate it, you guys. If it wasn't for y'all's support, we would have had podcasts deleted by now. So you guys really stepped up and helped us save those podcasts before they were deleted. We're still trying to go higher tiers with the podcasts, pay them more money because it's like pretty much the more money you pay them, the more podcasts we can upload and the more time that we get to use. So the more you guys donate, the more podcasts we'll put out, the more content you'll see. You'll see both on this YouTube channel and on our podcast. So if you want to listen to that, just search for Milsurp World on any sort of podcast host. Like I listen to Podcast Addict. You can look it up on iTunes or anything like that. So I appreciate you guys watching. And I hope you got something out of this video, and I will see you next time.